Hi, this is Krista Walsh.
Hey, this is Daniel Arthur Smith.
Hey, this is Terry R. Hill.
Hey, it's Josh Hayes, and you're listening to
30-minute author interviews
with my friend Preston Lay.
Woohoo!
Hey everybody, before we start the episode, I wanted to let you know about a giveaway going on with this episode. Franklin Horton, our guest, is giving one lucky person the chance to win a signed copy of The Borrowed World, as well as the audiobook version of the book. All you need to do is answer the following. The Borrowed World is Franklin Horton's first published book, but how many other novels did he write before he actually released The Borrowed World? Once you hear that question answered, head on over to Leigendarium.com and look for the show notes and leave your answer there for a chance to win. This giveaway will run until Tuesday, February 14th. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the next 30 minutes with Franklin Horton. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Our guest today is Franklin Horton. Thanks for taking time out of your day and coming on 30-Minute Author Interviews.
I'm glad to, Preston. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. We've started the podcast lately with a segment that we call Two Truths and a Lie. So if you could, do you have two truths and a lie about yourself? Right now, I'm currently batting under 500. We'll see if I can get it up or down with this one.
Okay, I've got it. Number one, I once saw Elvis. Number two, I used to build houses. Number three, I have thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail.
Dang it. I don't know if I'm going to get this one right. I'm trying to think what I know from when we've talked and met and everything. I've seen pictures of you hiking, so I think that one's going to be true. So I'm narrowing it down to meeting Elvis or building houses.
Seeing Elvis. Seeing Elvis.
I'm hoping the Elvis story is true, so I'm going to say the lie is the building the houses.
You would be wrong.
Oh man, what was the lie?
I have thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail. I've hiked little sections, but I have never thru-hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. Okay. Even though it is on my bucket list, I did see Elvis back in 1974. My grandmother took me, and I built houses for several years, but I haven't hiked the Appalachian Trail yet.
Okay. You'll have to knock that one out of your list.
Yeah, it's on the list for sure.
I've hiked part of it. We did part of a 50-mile hike when I was in Boy Scouts on the Appalachian Trail, so it was fun. So you'll definitely have to do that. So do you remember anything? Was there anything about the Elvis concert that just really stuck out to you and you still remember to this day?
Yeah, what was really funny was my grandmother took me, and she took me with a couple of more little old ladies that she taught school with. And what really impressed me was the effect that Elvis had on the little old ladies, because they were flipping out. They were hollering and screaming. He completely had these little old ladies wrapped around his finger. It was amazing.
That's hilarious. Yeah. That is fun. I bet you
they were acting like teenage girls.
I bet you that would have been a fun concert to go to. I'm jealous. I wish I could have gone to one.
I guess it was 3 years before he died, so he was already gaining weight and looking pretty rough. But, at least it happened.
That's true. You can say you went and saw him in concert.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, for those of our listeners that don't know who you are or what you do, why don't you kind of introduce everybody to who you are and what you do?
Okay. I'm a part-time writer, hoping to be a full-time writer one day. I released my first published novel, The Borrowed World, in May of 2015. It was actually my seventh novel that I'd completed, but I never got any of the earlier ones published, and it took off and developed a little following. So I guess around October that year, I released the second book in the series called Ashes of the Unspeakable. It was followed up in, I guess, March of 2016 with the third book in the series, Legion of Despair. And then that was followed by kind of a spin-off book from the series called Locker 9. And here on February 14th, the fourth book in the Borrowed World series, No Time for Mourning, will be released. And it's a post-apocalyptic story about a guy on a business trip from work, and there is a coordinated terror attack against the infrastructure of the country. So he ends up getting stuck a couple of 100 miles from home with no fuel, the power's out, cell phone networks are collapsing, and he ends up having to hoof it home to his family. And it's the story of his trip and what his family is experiencing back at home while he's on the road. And it seems to have hit a sweet spot for people because it's about an average guy, not a super soldier, not somebody with mega experience and, tons of hidden weapons and, sharp skills. It's just an ordinary guy and his journey, and people really seem to like it. It's done pretty well.
Well, before we jump into the Borrowed World series, you said that Borrowed World you said it was the seventh book that you've written, but you never published the other six. Do you think you'll ever publish your earlier stories, or are you going to leave those on the shelf?
I think they will end up staying on the shelf because, I was an English major in college. And even before that, when I was in high school, I was starting to write and submit. And I was an early reader of Twilight Zone magazine, which had Clive Barker stories and Stephen King stories. And I submitted to all kinds of things. And, when I ended up going to college and getting my English degree, at that time, genre fiction was just really pushed to the side because the universities all emphasize literary fiction and poetry. And so, for every science fiction author that they brought in to speak, they would bring in dozens of poets and literary fiction writers. And they really just kind of killed writing. So, for several years after college, I didn't even want to write because they had made what I was interested in seem so marginalized that, the first novels that I wrote after college were attempts at literary fiction, and they were pretty poor. But over time, I started getting back more to the thrillers and action stories and science fiction influence, and they start to get a little better, but I think I'm going to just chalk those off as learning experience and not ever try to pull them out of the desk drawer. Okay.
That's funny. So have you always, you said you got basically a degree in literature. Did you grow up as a fan of reading when you were younger?
Oh, absolutely. I can't even remember when it started, but even as a young kid, reading adventure stories and reading those stories, authors, like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew stuff, and these authors like Howard Pease that wrote books about, kids taken off to sea, stowed away in ships. And then, of course, when I discovered horror fiction, that was, the end. And I started – this was about the time that Stephen King was releasing his first novels, so I was sucked into those from the beginning. And, stuff like Rosemary's Baby and The Omen and The Other and all these other great 70s horror novels.
Okay. Where did your idea for your Borrowed World series come from?
Well, I was working a job where I had to travel from the area that I live in, which is Southwest Virginia, to Richmond, Virginia, which is about 325 miles, and I was having to go twice a month. So round trip, 650, 700 miles, something like that. And this started in the late 90s. So I was making this trip during the 9/11 period, during the period when they had that DC sniper who did some shootings in Richmond, and then all the way up through the Hurricane Katrina period. And it was just, it was a lot of this heightened terror alerts, being hyper aware and hyper vigilant and all that. And it really just made me start to think on these long trips by myself, well, how would I get home if I was on a trip like these people that went to New Orleans thinking they were going to have just a normal business trip, and then they end up stranded in the Superdome? You know, what if that happened to me? How would I get home? And being a backpacker at that time and somebody who liked outdoors, I started thinking, well, you know, I would just take a backpack and I would hoof it home. And so I charted a route. You know, I said, I'm going to make it from Richmond to the Charlottesville area, and then I'm going to make it to the intersection 81 and 64, and I'm going to veer off to the Appalachian Trail, and that's how I'm going to get home. And so just thinking about that was the whole start of this for me. And I'd always been a fan of post-apocalyptic fiction, going all the way back to, you know, I Am Legend with Richard Matheson and Stephen King, The Stand, and all that. So I thought, well, you know, I'm just going to write a book about this guy who has this experience that I'm thinking about. And that's where it began.
So the main character in The Borrowed World is Jim Powell. How much of Jim Powell is actually mirrored after you?
Quite a bit. I'm a little more diplomatic than he is. But, you know, there's a lot of us who censor what we say sometimes. And if we didn't self-censor, we may be less diplomatic. And so there's times that I've bit my tongue with my coworkers and not been as harsh as I may have imagined that I could have been. And Jim Powell doesn't have those censors. So he's kind of this sometimes rude, sometimes offensive guy who just says what he thinks, because his goal when this terror attack happens is to get himself home. He's not as concerned about his coworkers. He's not concerned about their thoughts. His concern is that he individually is going to get himself home. If they want to come, they can, but he's not going to try to persuade them. He's doing what he wants to do.
Have you planned out the entire series, or are you more of a fly by the seat of your pants with this?
You know, I had an idea that I wanted to do probably 5 or 6 books. And the reason being, because I know a lot of series start to go stale after that long, and it feels like the author is kind of stretching the narrative and trying to milk the narrative in some cases just to keep it going longer and longer. So I knew that my arc should be over 5 or 6 books, but what I planned to happen has been influenced by the interaction with fans of the series who send me messages and say, hey, I really like this aspect, or I like this aspect, or can you explore this more? So those influences have helped shape what the story has become. But also, writing the series has been a learning experience for me. And so as I grow with each book, that also influences where the next book will go. But I really plan that it's going to go about 6 books. And Locker 9 was kind of a spin-off. So when I terminate the Borrowed World series, I'm also going to pick up with the Locker 9 series. And I've got several other books on the side that I intend to write when I've finished the Borrowed World.
Okay. How much of your books are actually based when you write them? How much is based on current events with what's going on in the world?
Well, you know, the instability of the world and the fact that, you know, a single individual or a small group of individuals can conduct a terror attack that has an impact on a large number of people is something that I keep in mind. But I try not to dwell on fluctuations in politics and public sentiment and all that, because I really don't want it to be something that people read and they're like, well, you know, it's written from this point of view, or it's slanted for this type of person. Although, you know, if you read Amazon reviews, there are always people that, you know, will say, well, it's pro this, and then somebody will come along and say it's anti that, you know, and the reviews conflict with each other. But I do try to write it about the current state of the world, but not influenced by the politics of the world.
Okay. So I've gotten, I think, about halfway through the Borrowed World. And at the very beginning, you know, you talk about the terror attack that actually happened, the terror attack that caused everything in your book. How how likely do you think that scenario would actually be? Do you think that would be something that we could face?
Well, it's based on a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction is based on an EMP, which is, the type of nuclear explosion that is detonated in the atmosphere and then kills all the electronics. So people are basically back in the Stone Age just in an instant, and most post-apocalyptic fiction is based on that with some variation. But this is based, The Borrowed World is based on what's called a cascading systems failure event, which is where one system or one group of systems is impacted, and then it causes a strain on other systems, and then those systems begin to collapse. And in this case, what they did was, the power grid is made up of about 13 really serious electrical transformers that are custom made. And those transformers have no replacements in the country. They're made in South Korea or they're made in Germany, and there are no replacements for them in the United States. And once those transformers are destroyed, it can be 2 years before a replacement could be made, shipped to the United States, and then delivered to the site and installed. So any type of event that destroys critical infrastructure components then spreads out and affects other systems, and then it all starts to fall apart. And that's what happens in this. One of the targets was fuel refineries. And if you impact the fuel delivery system and the fuel reserves, then what happens is people start panicking, and then gas starts getting hoarded. And in this case, what happens is the president puts an executive order in place and says, we're freezing the fuel supply for first responders and the military until we can get this event under control. And that's what strands people along the highways and in the cities and starts the mass panic.
One thing I've really enjoyed when reading The Borrowed World is those books they're not too terribly long. They're all around 250 pages, and you keep the scenes just moving right along, and you keep your readers hooked. How hard was it for you to keep all your books at that length and the story moving the way that you did?
Well, I think my goal has always been to do like a 70 to 85,000 word book, because I think that keeps it short enough that people finish it and they feel like, well, that didn't drag on, didn't have a lot of dead spots. And then the other thing that kind of influenced me was, a James Patterson idea that a chapter should only be as long as it takes to deliver the key components of the story, that you don't drag on because you think a chapter should be a certain length, and that, the book should be a certain length. You spend the time it takes to deliver the key components, and then you move on. And I think that does make people feel like the story moves for them. And, the most rewarding thing about this series has been hearing from people. I heard from this guy the other day from England who said, these are the only books I've ever read. They're the only books that are in my house. And, hearing from people who don't like to read but like your books is just an amazing compliment.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You mentioned James Patterson. That's one thing. He was one of the first authors I got into after I read Harry Potter. That's the first actual book series I sat down and read because my wife kind of told me to. She's like, you should read. Well, we were dating at the time. She said, you should read this series. It's really good. And that's one thing that I always liked about James Patterson's books was the chapters were short. But the bad thing about that is you're like, oh, the chapters are short. I can read one more. And then it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and you got to get ready for work soon and you're still up. So,
well, that there is a good effect from that, though, because one of the other things that I'd read, and it wasn't James Patterson that said this, is have enough divisions that people feel like that when they put the book down, they've completed a unit of the story. They're not having to quit mid-chapter or mid-scene. Have enough divisions that a person can finish whatever unit of the story they're on and feel like they've completed a section when they put the book down. That generally that creates a more satisfying reading experience than a person, wanting to finish a chapter, and that chapter, the end is just not coming, and they're tired and they want to go to bed, but they can't reach a place to stop.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you consider your books more post-apocalyptic, or do you think are more prepper?
It's I wrote them considering them post-apocalyptic fiction.
Okay.
And what happened in the meantime since then is prepper readers have really latched onto them. And I think that that's based on the fact that a lot of the information I included was factual, and that there was a lot of concrete detail, but I didn't necessarily write them with that intention. And that's probably influenced the series as I've gone on, because it's forced me to make sure that all my information is accurate and factual, and that so somebody doesn't come back down the road with some detail that I've missed, because people do that. So I still think of them as post-apocalyptic fiction, but am aware that there is a huge prepper audience for these books.
Right. So has writing this series in your books, has it changed anything that changed your life any? Like, have you, when you've had to do research for your books, have you come across anything that you're like, I haven't been doing that, but I think I probably ought to?
I have a lot of prepper roots, but I don't see them as prepper roots because, as I said, I live in Southwest Virginia. Up until my parents' generation, the people in my family before that were all, kind of self-sustaining. They lived on farms and lived subsistence lifestyles where they raised most of their food. And my parents' generation really tried to get away from that because they saw living on a farm and having to raise food as the trappings of poverty. So there was a whole generation that tried to get away from that, and now people were getting back more to that. So I kind of look at it like I'm trying to get back to where my grandparents were at having the freedom that comes from having you raised your own food. And, we do a lot of that. We have some livestock and we have gardens, and we, are comfortable that we could survive 6 months to a year without the grocery store. But I don't necessarily look at it as being a prepper as much as I look at it as just, that's the way people used to live, and I'm more comfortable living that way now. But it's definitely influenced that because part of that comes from the fact that I interact with so many readers who come from such a diverse group of experiences, excuse me, that hearing their stories and their experiences and the information they bring to me makes me more aware of, things that I should be doing differently. So I've changed a lot of things about my own lifestyle just based on interaction with readers.
Gotcha. So how much research actually goes into each novel that you do with, from the terror attacks to how he travels and the stuff he comes across? How much research do you actually have to do for each novel?
Well, I usually start with the story, and I know that certain things are going to happen in the story. So as I get closer to that event in the story, I start researching that. But there are hours and hours and hours and hours of research in each book, because specifically with the terror attacks in the first book, I used a particular technique to fire mortars that was not well publicized, but there are videos available that show insurgent fighters using this technique to launch mortars. So when I included that, I've heard from all kinds of military and intelligence people who are like, that was a good detail because that told us that you had done your research. And, just this week I got an email from a doctor who was like, I like the details about injuries, and I like that you use accurate trauma care information, that you use accurate first aid information when dealing with these injuries. So there are people, regardless of what aspect of it that you're talking about, there are people that pay attention to every little detail. So you have to try to get as much of it right as you can, because there are people who will point it out if you've flubbed it up. Yeah,
I mean, and it shows in your reviews how much care you put into these books. Borrowed World has 626 reviews. You're sitting at 4.5 stars. Ashes of the Unspeakable Book 2, you're at 4.5 stars with 267 reviews. Legion of Despair, 5 stars average after 173 reviews. So I mean, it shows with the care that you put into these novels.
And you know what's interesting about that is it's even better on Audible, because I don't know what most people's numbers are, but my sales are about 50% Audible and 40% ebook, 10% paperback. But my Audible reviews for The Borrowed World, I think I have about 1,300 last time I checked. So either Audible fans are more diligent about leaving reviews, or that just shows you the difference in the readership there.
For those that don't know, I have the ebook copy, the Audible copy, and the physical copy. One thing that I really liked before I even met you and I discovered your series is you can get the ebook on Amazon, but then add the Audible book to it for $1.99. And man, it is a high quality audiobook. You have your narrator is Kevin Pierce, and he is one of my top narrators when I'm listening to books. He does such an amazing job with your audiobooks. How did you and Kevin end up getting together to work on this to work on your books?
Well, I was an audiobook listener for years because, as I said, I used to have to make these long drives to Richmond twice a month. And I listened to audiobooks on that trip. So I had a lot of the experiences that kind of mark bad audiobooks. So I knew the effect that bad narration or poor audio quality could have on your listening experience. And I also knew how changing narrators mid-series could, be the kiss of death for an audiobook series. So I kind of knew that the audiobook quality was important. So when I was putting out, the way it works is you post your book on ACX, which is Amazon's audiobook exchange, and producers come to you with auditions. And when I heard Kevin Pierce's audition, I knew his voice from some other series I'd listened to. And I knew that he produced a good quality audiobook, and I knew that if I latched on to him for this first book that he would be there for the duration, because it was important not to change narrators. So we have had a very, very good partnership, and I include him as a friend, and we've just had an excellent working relationship. I read horror stories about people hiring narrators that take months and months to produce their books. But Kevin is a consummate professional. He is top notch in communicating with you, and he delivers the product that you can just be really, really proud of.
I know when I first, before I got the physical copy, when I had just the ebook and the audiobook, I actually prefer just to read along with him because he does such a great job. So I think you definitely found a winner with him. And for those that might be saying his name might sound familiar, if you've ever read Tom Abrams, he does Tom Abrams books as well. So that might be where you kind of know him. But if you haven't checked out any of his work, go on Amazon, look at Franklin Horton's books, and just listen to the audio clip. I guarantee you're going to love this guy's voice. It's so good. And as you mentioned earlier, so you have your Borrowed World series, and then you also started, you said kind of a spinoff, and that was called, I'm scrolling down to it, Locker 9.
Locker 9, yeah.
How many books do you see being in that series?
I really think Locker 9 is only going to be about 3 books, because that came from this thing that a lot of the people who had read The Borrowed World reached out to me, and they're like, I really like this kind of thing. I like the information that you included for, safety while traveling away from home. But what concerns me the most is my child that's either in college or living in a distant city, and how I might get them home if some bad event happened. So Locker 9 is about a paranoid dad who puts preparations in place to get his daughter home from college if there's ever some type of societal collapse event. And it was all based on discussions with other people. And so that series takes the same terror attack, collapsing systems failure event that is in The Borrowed World and just presents it from another angle. It's like The Walking Dead and Fear of the Walking Dead.
Okay. And you said you had some other series in mind. Will they also be a spinoff of the same terror attack, just told from different perspectives?
No, I have several standalone thriller type terrorism thriller ideas that I'm kind of bouncing around, and some of them are pretty well developed through notes and outlines and are just ready to write as I find time, because I'm trying to do 3 books a year, and it's I work full time. So trying to fit in the writing and the working, the social media aspect of it, and answering the emails and all that business is just makes for a full day.
Yeah.
But as I have time, I want to write those other series too, because, the more you get out there, the more it brings people in and they find the other books. And, this is what I want to do full time. I've worked 25 years to get to the point of being able to publish because, like I said, I had 7 novels that never saw the light of day. And when I got The Borrowed World out there and it started doing well, I'm like, I'm reaching a point where maybe one day this can be my retirement and I can quit work and just sit at home and write.
Well, here at the here at 30-Minute Author Interviews, we like to end each podcast with a series that we call the Legendary Ending. So some of these questions are kind of book related. So the very first question is, what songs are currently on your writing playlist?
Well, I find lyrics distracting if I'm trying to write. Mm-hmm. So mostly I want sound effect, background kind of music. I like jazz because I think it evokes a tempo that helps me write and makes me feel energized. But I don't like music with lyrics when I'm trying to write. There's another guy named Steve Tibbetts who writes music that has electric guitar and conga drums and all kinds of crazy sound effects in it. But that's the kind of stuff I like when I'm writing.
Okay. If you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse, which one of your book characters would you want to be stuck with and why?
There's a female character in my books named Randy. And I think above all characters that is probably the person that I would want to take with me, because Randy is a grandmother, but she is scrappy and resilient. She is a person that, it doesn't matter what's coming at her. She's coming out the other side.
Sounds good. Now, if you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse, but you could pick any character from any media source, comics, books, movies, TV shows, whatever, who would you want to be stuck with and why?
I would probably take Carol from The Walking Dead, because she's kind of got that icy edge to her that, if you can keep her on your side, you don't have to have any question about whether she can do the job or not.
Sounds good. If you had a time machine, where would you travel and why?
That's an interesting question. I think that I would probably like to go back to the early 1700s and see what my area here looked like when there were very few people here, but, pioneers and all that business, just out of curiosity, because, there's all kinds of interesting characters in every generation to talk to. But I think it would probably be more to see what this part of the country looked like before people got here.
Yeah, it would be interesting just because for those that don't know, we actually live in kind of the same area. We live about 30 minutes away from each other. And it's already small enough as it is. So it would be interesting to see what it looked like back then.
When it was just Indians and a few settlers.
That's right. And if you could have one superpower, which one would you want and why?
I think it would be the ability to see back and forth through time, to predict the future, and to look back in the past and know what happened then, but to be able to see forward and backward with no limits, because I think it would make decision making a lot easier, because, we all struggle with making decisions. And one of the great tools to have would be to know how your decision was going to impact your life. If you could know, if I make this decision and look forward to see how it was going to turn out for you, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So here's the question we're kind of famous for here at 30-Minute Author Interviews on the Leigendarium is, a penguin walks through the door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say and why is he here?
Well, there would only be one reason that a penguin in a sombrero would come to my house, and it would be because he knows that I love Mexican beer. So he would come in and he would say, "Quiero cerveza," and I would give him a Dos Equis, and he would stop and hang out.
Sounds good. And then before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you would like to share with the listeners?
I think that if my writing career is anything, it is the study and persistence. Because, like I said, I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And I think when I finished my first novel, that I thought harps were going to go off and that an agent was going to show up at the door and that a publisher was going to come through the next day and that it was just going to be this miraculous thing. And I was really disappointed when that didn't happen. But I continued to write. And it took 25 years before this really paid off for me. So the thing is, if you like to write and you enjoy writing, then just keep at it, because there has really been no better time in history for writers. The ability to publish what you write is there now in a way that it's never been before. So just be persistent and keep at it, and don't be easily deterred.
Sounds good. And where can our listeners go if they'd like to learn more about you or the stories that you've written?
I have a website, franklinhorton.com, which would be a good starting point. My books are also available on Amazon. If you're interested in the Audible version, you can find it on Audible or iTunes. That's probably the easiest place to start. And I also am on Facebook and pretty active in my social media. So if people have questions, that's a good place to interact with me and ask those questions.
Sounds good. And I highly recommend people pick up the Borrowed World series and definitely get the Audible with your purchase of your ebook, because it's an amazing read and an amazing listen. But thank you for coming on and doing 30-minute author interviews. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Preston. Thank you very much.
Well, guys, that's all the time we've got for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to 30-Minute Author Interviews. We hope you come back next Wednesday and every Wednesday for a brand new author interview. And don't forget to head on over to Leigendarium.com and check out the show notes for this episode, where you can win a signed copy of The Borrowed World by Franklin Horton, as well as the audiobook copy. This giveaway will run until Tuesday, February 14th. And we'd like to give a shout out to a couple of our Patreon subscribers. We'd like to say thank you to Diane S. Loftus, Third Scribe, and Maggie Stewart Grant. They have supported 30-minute author interviews over at Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/legendarium. That's patreon.com/leighdarium. And check out the different rewards we have. We have t-shirts as rewards. We have a special Patreon-only podcast called 10 Questions With, where we're going to be asking authors 10 questions, and many other rewards. So thank you to those three for supporting us on Patreon. And until next time, guys, remember to stay legendary. screwed that one up. Blooper reel.